Tonight, a major kidnap crisis facing the British, French and Algerian governments. Islamist militants raid a BP gas plant in the Algerian desert and take an estimated 40 people hostage.
The safety of those involved and their co-workers is our absolute priority, and we will work around the clock to resolve this crisis.
So is this payback for the French intervention in neighbouring Mali? Also tonight, the land of the free and the home of the brave tries one more time to reform gun laws. But with some school teachers already armed, is it too late to change the American love affair with the gun?
So what's going to happen to an armed gunman who breaks into your school?
They're going to be shot, hopefully, in the best case scenario.
Britain in the EU or on the edge? David Cameron again promises to bring back powers from Brussels.
On Europe right now, the PM is in a whole world of pain. Nothing he says on the subject will satisfy everybody, and there's a real danger he'll satisfy nobody.
We ask one of our closest European allies, Sweden, what they think of the Cameron strategy.
The UK is a part of a dynamic and growing Europe, and normally Sweden and the UK tend to have the same views on openness, competitiveness and free trade. So for us it is very worrying that the British debate seems to be sliding, where you almost accidental might be leaving the European Union.
Now, if you eat lamb, beef, pork and even a slice of Bambi, why do the British say nay to eating a bit of horse? We'll be tucking in later to see what we're missing. Good evening. It's every government's nightmare. A major kidnapping in a remote location involving Islamist extremists and British nationals. The armed raid on a BP gas facility in the Algerian desert near Libya could have many causes, but what is clear is that British, French, American, Norwegian and Japanese lives are at stake, and there may be a link with the fighting in Mali. One jihadist leader promised that the gates of hell would open after French troops with European support began backing the Mali government against extremist rebels. Is today's attack the kind of thing he had in mind? Tim Hugh reports.
The scene of this crisis is a natural gas field, one of Algeria's largest, deep in the Sahara. A field run jointly by BP, Statoil of Norway and the Algerian State Oil Company. According to Algerian sources, the attack began at dawn when heavily armed Islamists ambushed a bus carrying engineers from the gas plant to a nearby airport. The attackers were driven off, but later took a number of hostages at the plant itself. 2 foreigners, including a British national, are believed to have been killed, and there are reports that the total number being held is 41. They include Norwegians, a man from Northern Ireland, and several Americans. The Algerian army is now surrounding the plant, and negotiations with the hostage takers are continuing. Tonight, the Foreign Secretary William Hague confirmed UK citizens were also being held.
This does include a number of British nationals, and this is therefore an extremely dangerous situation. We're in close touch with the Algerian government. The Algerian military have deployed to the area. The Prime Minister has spoken to the Prime Minister of Algeria.
The gas field at In Amenas is in the east of Algeria, close to the Libyan border. South of there is a vast and poorly policed desert region straddling Algeria, Niger and Mali, a region where a number of Westerners have already been taken hostage by Islamist groups. Now those groups have gained more weapons left over from the war against Colonel Gaddafi in neighbouring Libya. In northern Mali, Islamist groups have now taken control of more than half the country. France intervened last week when it feared those groups were moving south towards the capital, Bamako. France began by sending warplanes to bomb rebel positions in Mali. It's followed up with ground troops. One rebel group warns that France had opened the gates of hell by its action. So does today's hostage-taking show what they meant? Several claims of responsibility from Islamists have been made in phone calls to a news agency in neighbouring Mauritania. According to one call, the group involved is called the Masked Brigade and was formed to attack the interests of countries that are intervening in Mali. One call said it was a group led by a veteran jihadi fighter in the region, Mukhtar Belmokhtar.
Mokhtar Belmokhtar was known as the One-Eyed, and he was one of the members of the Salafist group for preaching in combat, which was the predecessor to the new Al-Qaeda of the Islamic Maghreb. So he's a part of the group and apparently has defected, or maybe he's just spread a little bit of power into Mali. We know that the groups in Algeria, the Salafist violent groups, have links with the groups in Mali and Niger.
There's no proof yet that the North African affiliate of Al-Qaeda is behind today's hostage-taking, but many believe that it is, and that the motivation is clear.
It's a direct consequence of the French intervention in the ongoing crisis in Mali, and dare I say, it's no coincidence that it's happened in Algeria. Algeria has long warned against an intervention in Mali, but over recent weeks it has openly supported the French intervention, and it seems that it's a revenge attack against such a support.
Today in Mali, civilians were fleeing the combat zone where France says its infantry will be fighting within hours, despite the crisis in Algeria.
Je suis en liaison permanente.
I am in constant contact with the Algerian authorities who are doing and will do everything that is needed. We are also in contact with the heads of state and government of the countries concerned. All this is not without a connection, as everyone will have understood, to the operation that we are undertaking.
Meanwhile, the EU has said it will speed up deployment of military trainers, including summits expected from Britain, to work with West African forces in Mali. It's a show of support for France, taken in the face of what many believe is a growing risk to Western security from North and West Africa.
This attack against Western interests and against Western lives in particular will have huge consequences on the whole region. The global war on terror, which has so far focused on countries like Iraq and indeed Afghanistan, is now shifting in Africa, and it means that a new front in the war on terror has now opened in that part of the world.
The operation in Mali is intended to reduce the terrorist threat to European interests. But as the crisis continues in Algeria, some think it'll do the opposite.
Tim Buell reporting. Well, for some insight into what might be behind the attack, the former Foreign Office Minister Lord Malloch Brown is here, as is Dr. Bernie Sebi, who's a specialist on relations between France and North Africa. He's from the University of Birmingham. Does it look pretty likely that this is Mali linked?
You know, very plausible. It seems too much of a coincidence, and even the French president in that clip was not acknowledging there's a connection. So I think even if there is some sort of opportunistic ransom-seeking component to it, what is really driving this is a Islamic radicalization in the region, which has now been provoked by the French action, which of course is in itself probably why the French were right to go in.
Justifiably go in your view?
Look, it was probably the least bad of poor choices, but there was a real risk that Bamako itself would fall, that Mali as a country would fall under the control of these Islamists. So some action of this kind had to be taken, but the consequences are going to be probably quite severe.
Dr. Sebi, I mean, what kind of group are these people? What do you think they actually want?
Well, these people, first of all, want to publicize their opposition to the French intervention in Mali, but they are probably also seeking some benefits for themselves, possibly some money, as has been mentioned, but also recognition among their peers, because they very often want to outdo each other between the various brigades making Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb. There is a sort of competition. And at the moment, Mokhtar Belmokhtar, who claims to be the person behind this abduction, had recently been reported as being just expelled from Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb. He was in very bad terms with the key boss in the area, so he wants to reassert his power over his men, probably around 200 or 300 people, scattered in the area of the Sahara, and he wants, through this action, to show that he is really at the center of activity.
And he's actually an Algerian, isn't he?
Yes, he's an Algerian, because, I mean, when we look at the situation in Mali, we should not forget that it all started in Algeria, in the Algerian north. It was in the 1990s. These were initially Islamist groups which wanted to overturn the Algerian government. They failed in doing so. They were finally expelled from the Algerian territory in the years around 2000, especially because the Algerian army really increased its capability. And as a result, afterwards, they sought refuge in Mali, and from Mali they started to develop their own logistics.
I mean, this is going to be a nightmare for the British, the French and the other governments, isn't it? How dangerous do you think it is? I
think it's very dangerous. To be honest, until this event today, I'd wondered whether it might not be more dangerous in France particularly, because I think at the level of governments, not necessarily at peoples, but at the level of governments in West Africa, this is broadly supported, because they were as alarmed as anybody by this rising tide of radical Islam, and I do believe that most of the governments of the region will rally behind the French. But what this is demonstrating is the limited authority of those governments over Islamic elements in their own society. So it's going to be dangerous in France, it's going to be dangerous in the region. And for the French, the real worry is how they're going to get out of it. I mean, always these interventions are easy in, but usually very difficult to exit.
As the French press have said, actually, part of the critique. And in terms of this particular group, I mean, are they people who are willing to die for the cause, or is there such an element of banditry and, as you say, rivalry between the groups? They want to survive and prosper in whatever way they can.
The leaders will probably want to save their lives one way or another, but some of their fighters are definitely ready to die, and this is really what makes them such a difficult enemy to fight for the French and Malian armies, because they're really ready to give their lives if necessary. The big bosses will try to escape, but the other ones really want, the infantrymen are really there to die if necessary. And these are people, especially, I mean, the leaders are extremely trained. Some of them started their careers in Afghanistan in the 1980s or in Lebanon fighting the Israelis, then afterwards fought the Algerian government in the 1990s during the dirty war in Algeria, then started to develop alliances in the Sahara, especially by marrying local Tuareg women, which made them part of the kith and kin of the Tuaregs. And I think we're touching here also the crux of the relationship between the Islamists and the Tuaregs, who used to be very moderate Muslims, who would not be tempted by this type of adventure and ideology. But because of these ties, they are becoming actually much more open to alliance with these terrorist groups.
No, we don't just in the specifics of this hostage situation, it could go on for a very long time. And we had the French trying to rescue one of their people in Somalia. Unfortunately, it went wrong, but he'd been there for years.
No, well, that's right. But I mean, in this case, it's not going to go on for years, in the sense that, the hostages, we know where they are, the Algerian army is now surrounding them, but it could go on for months. There's been another example in Algeria in the past where I think that's correct, that it did go on. It did go on for months. But I think, one other element one has to put on the table in this is, so familiar in these interventions is the fact that the government on whose behalf you intervene, whether it was way back when the Americans and the French went in for South Vietnam, or whether it was Afghanistan and the Karzai regime, or now with the regime in Bamako, it's a weak regime without much legitimacy or authority. So you're pushing on a piece of string, you're coming in militarily, but you don't have a government ally locally able to extend its political authority and take advantage of your military intervention.
Okay, thank you both very much. Thank you.